The torches came first, 6 of them, bobbing through the black pines like hungry eyes, before Zora Steeljaw ever heard the dogs. She pressed her back against the rock face, breath ragged, one hand white-knuckled around the haft of her hand axe, the other pressed to a gash along her ribs that had gone from hot to numb somewhere in the last mile of running. Behind her, the ravine dropped away into darkness. Ahead, the men of Hollow Creek were coming for her with rope and rifle, shouting a dead man's name like a curse. Murderer, the word rolled down through the trees, carried by a voice thick with whiskey and grief. Orc bitch killed Abel Cormac in his own dooryard. String her up before she runs to her kin. Zora's lip curled back from her tusks. She had not killed Abel Cormac. She had found him already cold in the mud behind his own barn, throat opened, his mule screaming in its stall, and she had been fool enough to kneel beside him and check for breath that was long gone before his neighbors came around the bend with lanterns and found an orc crouched over a dead man's body. She had run because running was the only thing left to do. She was 3 days from her old warband, further still from anywhere that would call her kin, and now she was going to die on a stranger's road for a killing she had not done. The dogs broke into the clearing first, and then the men, and there was nowhere left to run. She turned to face them because Zora Steeljaw did not die with her back to anyone, not even 6 frightened farmers with rifles shaking in their hands. That was when the wagon came around the bend of the trail, drawn by a bay mare that did not spook at torchlight or orc or shouting men, driven by a man who looked entirely too calm for the mess he was riding into. "Whoa now," Luke Yates said, easy as anything, hauling back on the reins so the wagon rattled to a stop square across the narrow trail, blocking it entirely between 2 boulders. "Evening, gentlemen. Little late for a hunt, isn't it?" "Get that wagon out of the road, peddler," snapped a broad man with a torch in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. Zora would learn later his name was Garrick Voss, and that he had appointed himself leader of this posse with the ease of a man who enjoyed being obeyed. "This isn't your business." "Everything on this road is my business," Luke said. "I've been walking it for 6 years, which is more than I can say for the lot of you, since I don't recall seeing torches out this far from town before tonight." His eyes flicked past Garrick, found Zora pinned against the rock with blood on her side, and something in his face changed, not fear, though there was plenty of reason for it, but a kind of quick, careful calculation, the look of a man doing arithmetic with lives instead of numbers. "She hurt anybody here tonight, anybody bleeding besides her?" "She killed Abel Cormac," Garrick said. "Found her hunched right over his corpse." "Found her or caught her?" "Same thing." "It is not," Luke said, and swung down off the wagon seat, slow and unhurried, hands loose and open at his sides. He was not a large man. Zora, watching through the haze of pain and adrenaline, took his measure the way she'd take the measure of any stranger who might get her killed or might not. Brown hair gone ragged with road dust, a face weathered more by sun and worry than by years, a peddler's canvas coat hung with the small tools of his trade, no sword, no rifle, just a long trading knife at his hip that had clearly cut more rope and rawhide than throats. He should have been the least dangerous thing in that clearing. Instead, he walked forward and planted himself between the posse and her rock ledge as if that settled something. "Move, Yates," Garrick said, and there was a warning under it now. "You want to shoot past me to get to her, that's your business," Luke said. "But I've traded goods along this stretch of road with half the men standing here, and every one of you knows I don't lie and I don't run my mouth for free. So hear me say this plain. You drag an orc woman back to Hollow Creek tonight and hang her before sunup, and it comes out later she didn't do it. That's a rope around all your necks too, one way or another. Cormac's land's worth fighting over. You sure nobody closer to home had a reason to want him dead?" Was a wild guess, thrown out to buy seconds, but Zora saw 2 of the men glance sideways at each other, and Garrick's jaw tightened in a way that told her Luke Yates had, by blind luck or sharp instinct, put a thumb directly on a bruise. "That's slander," Garrick said. "That's a question," Luke said. "Answer it in the daylight in front of the magistrate with the body examined proper instead of buried in a hurry, or hang her tonight in the dark and hope nobody ever asks it again." The dogs whined. The torches sputtered. For a long moment nobody moved, and Zora understood with a strange lurch in her chest that this stranger had just spent his own safety like coin to buy her a few more minutes of breathing, and he did not even know her name. "She goes free tonight," Garrick finally said. "But this isn't finished, Yates. You've made yourself part of it now." "Then I'm part of it," Luke said. The posse backed off through the trees, torches guttering, dogs dragged along by their collars, until the clearing was empty but for Zora, the peddler, and his patient bay mare. Zora slid down the rock face until she was sitting in the leaf litter, the adrenaline draining out of her all at once and leaving the wound in her side screaming for attention. "You are either the bravest man I have ever seen," she said, her voice rough, "or the stupidest." "Folks in town would tell you it's usually both," Luke said, and came toward her slow, hands still open, the way a man might approach a spooked horse rather than a woman twice his strength who could break his spine with one hand. "You're bleeding." "Let me look." Why? It was not gratitude in her voice yet. It was suspicion, honed sharp over years of learning that kindness from humans usually had a hook buried in it somewhere. Why does a human peddler stand in front of 6 armed men for an orc he does not know? Luke crouched at a careful distance, studying her face rather than her wound for a moment, and something in his expression was so plainly, simply honest that it caught her off guard. Because 6 armed men dragging one person off into the dark to hang her without a trial isn't justice, whatever color her skin is, he said. And because I've been laughed out of every tavern from here to the coast for being too soft-hearted to leave a hurt animal on the road, so I figure I'm not about to start leaving hurt people either. He held up both hands when she stiffened at the word animal. Poor choice of words. "You're not an animal. I meant it as, I meant I don't leave folks bleeding in the woods, that's all. Will you let me look at that cut or not?" She studied him a long moment. The steady hands, the honest eyes, the wagon full of trade goods that told her he was a man who survived by knowing the roads and knowing people, by reading danger correctly more often than not. Whatever he saw when he looked at her, it was not the reflexive fear or hatred she had come to expect from most humans on sight of tusks and green-gray skin. It was something closer to simple concern. "Zora," she said at last. "Zora Steeljaw." "Luke Yates," he said. "Let's get that wound closed up before you bleed out arguing with me about it." Luke's homestead sat 2 hours further down the trade road. A low log house with a lean-to barn and a fenced kitchen garden gone half wild with summer growth, tucked into a fold of land where a creek ran cold and fast off the mountains. It had been his father's place before a fever took both his parents 6 winters back, and Luke had kept it more out of stubbornness than any real talent for farming, using it as a base to load his wagon before setting out on the long loops of trading that took him from the border towns to the trapper camps in the high country and back again. He was, by his own cheerful admission as he helped Zora down from the wagon bed in the gray hour before dawn, better at knowing every back road, ford, and shortcut between the mountains and the plains than he was at almost anything else useful. "It isn't much," he said, lighting a lamp inside the cabin, "but nobody's going to come looking for an orc in my barn loft. Folks mostly forget I exist unless they need thread or salt or a letter carried." "That will change," Zora said, easing herself down onto a bench with a grimace. "The moment Garrick Voss tells the whole town you hid me. Let it change." Luke set a kettle over the banked coals in the hearth and began pulling clean linen and a jar of stinging amber salve from a shelf with the practiced economy of a man who had patched his own wounds more than once out on the road. "You want to tell me what actually happened out there?" "Because I've known Abel Cormac near 10 years, traded him seed and nails every spring, and I never once heard him say a hard word about orcs, which is more than I can say for most of Hollow Creek. Doesn't sit right that you'd have killed him." "I did not," Zora said, and there was iron in it, plain and unadorned. "I came down from the high pass 3 days ago." "My clan," she stopped, then made herself continue, because this man had bled nothing but risk for her already and deserved at least the truth. My clan is gone, scattered. There was a dispute over raiding humans for grain. I refused it. I said there had to be another way, trade instead of theft, and I was not the only one who thought so, but I was the loudest, and the chieftain did not care to be argued with. I was cast out. I have been walking since, trading what I carry for what I need, trying to find some corner of this land where an orc who wants peace instead of war might be let to live in it. And Cormac. I smelled smoke from his chimney and thought I might trade dried meat for bread, nothing more. I found him in the mud behind his barn with his throat cut and his mule screaming, already gone cold. I knelt to be certain because I have seen enough death to know how it looks, and that is when his neighbors came around the corner with lanterns. She met Luke's eyes. I did not kill him, but I understand why it looked as it did. Luke was quiet a moment, working the salve into the long shallow cut along her ribs with careful, unhurried hands, and Zora found herself watching his face rather than the wound, waiting for the flicker of doubt that would tell her he did not believe a word of it. It did not come. I believe you, he said simply. Cormac had a boundary dispute going with a fellow named Garrick Voss over that stretch of creek land between their two claims. Been going on a year, maybe more. Voss wanted it bad enough to threaten Cormac in the tavern once, loud enough that half the town heard it. Man like that finds a dead body and an orc standing conveniently over it. That's not bad luck for him. That's a gift. Zora's eyes narrowed. You think Voss killed him? I think it's worth finding out, Luke said, and tied off the bandage with a neat, careful knot. There. That should hold if you don't go running through any more forests tonight. No promises, Zora said, and for the first time since the torches had appeared through the pines, something that was almost a smile touched the corner of her mouth. She stayed in the loft above the barn for the better part of 2 weeks while her wound closed, and in that time Zora Steeljaw learned the particular rhythms of Luke Yates' homestead, the creak of the barn door at dawn, when he went to feed the mare, the low tune he hummed while mending harness leather on the porch in the evenings, the careful way he always knocked twice on the loft ladder before climbing up so she would never be startled by him. She had spent her whole life among warriors who measured worth in strength and blood, and it was strange, disorienting, oddly moving to be looked after by a man who measured it in patience. The first time she came down from the loft in full daylight, she wore what remained of her travel leathers. A fitted vest of dark, oiled hide lay snug over a linen underblouse, sleeves cut close to the arm for a knife-thrower's freedom of movement, breeches tucked into tall boots scuffed from 3 days of hard walking, a wide belt at her waist that still held her hand axe and a curved trading knife. It was clothing made for a woman who moved fast and fought when she had to, cut close enough to her powerful frame that it showed the strength in her rather than hiding it. And when Luke looked up from where he was mending a wagon wheel and saw her standing in his dooryard in the morning sun, green-gray skin catching the light, dark hair bound back in a thick braid, tusks just visible at the corners of a mouth that seemed always on the verge of some dry, cutting remark, he forgot entirely what he had been about to say. "You are staring, peddler," Zora said. "I am," Luke admitted, because he had never seen much use in lying about obvious things. "You're a hard woman not to stare at." "Careful," she said, though the warning had no real heat in it. "Orc women do not care for being flattered by men who cannot back up their words." "I'm not flattering you," Luke said. "I'm just telling you what my eyes are doing. Different thing entirely." She laughed then, a real laugh, low and surprised out of her, as though it had been a long while since anyone had made her do it, and something settled into place between them in that moment that neither of them could yet name, but both of them felt. The trouble was that Hollow Creek did not forget so easily, and within the month Luke had no choice but to ride into town for supplies he could not do without flour, salt, coil rope for the wagon, and a new blade for his plow before the ground turned too hard to work. Zora insisted on coming, arguing that she would not sit idle in a barn loft while he risked his neck buying her salt, and Luke, who had learned quickly that arguing with Zora Steeljaw when her mind was set was an exercise in futility. Only asked that she keep her hood up and her temper leashed until they were clear of the square. Hollow Creek was a huddle of timber buildings behind a low stockade fence, grown up around a crossroads trading post the way frontier towns did, with a saloon, a smithy, a chapel with a crooked steeple, and a market square where farmers sold produce off the backs of wagons on trading days. The moment Zora stepped down from Luke's wagon in that square, hood or no hood, the whispering started, spreading outward from the nearest stalls like ripples on a pond, and more than one hand drifted toward a belted knife. "That's her," someone hissed. "That's the one killed Cormac." "Easy," Luke murmured, low enough only Zora could hear, one hand resting lightly at the small of her back, not holding her, never holding her but present, a point of contact that said plainly, "I am here and I am not moving. Just need the rope and the plow blade, in and out." They almost made it. They were 3 stalls from the wagon, arms full of purchases, when a woman's voice cut across the square, bright and pointed as a needle. "Luke Yates, I hardly recognized you under all that company." Mirabelle Hale came around a cart of autumn squash with the easy confidence of a woman who had never once doubted her own welcome anywhere, dark curls pinned up under a straw bonnet, a green dress cinched smart at the waist, a basket of dyed ribbon on her arm. She was, Zora noted with an unfamiliar tightening in her chest, extremely pretty and extremely aware of it. "You haven't come round the store in weeks. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten the way." "Been busy, Mirabelle," Luke said, and there was nothing in his tone but the same easy friendliness he seemed to offer everyone. But Zora watched the woman's eyes travel over her, slow and assessing, and felt her jaw set hard. "I can see that," Mirabelle said, gaze flicking to Zora and back with a small, deliberately polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "You do keep the strangest company these days. Father says half the men in this town think you've lost your senses," sheltering that she paused, choosing the word with visible care, "creature." "Watch your tongue," Zora said very quietly before Luke could speak, "or I will show you exactly what this creature is capable of." "Zora," Luke said low, a warning and a plea both. Mirabelle's smile widened, unbothered, the smile of a woman who had never once in her life feared consequences. "Careful, Luke, it bites." She turned her attention fully onto him then, tilting her head, twirling a ribbon between 2 fingers with practiced idleness. "You know, my father's looking to hire a hand for the store come harvest season. Good wage, warm bed, none of this wandering the back roads with a wagon and a stray orc for company. Might be worth thinking on if you ever tire of it." "I'll keep it in mind," Luke said, in a tone that made abundantly clear he would do nothing of the sort, and steered Zora firmly toward the wagon before either woman could say another word. They rode out of Hollow Creek in silence for the better part of a mile, and it was Zora who finally broke it, staring hard at the road ahead rather than at Luke beside her. "She wants you," Zora said. "It was not a question." "She wants somebody steady with a bit of land and no bad habits," Luke said. "I happen to fit the description on paper. Doesn't mean anything." She looked at me the way one looks at a wolf that has wandered too close to livestock. "She's wrong too," Luke said, and there was an edge in his voice now that had not been there before, something protective and a little fierce. "You didn't do a damn thing to that man, and I don't much care what Mirabelle Hale or anyone else in that town thinks they know." Zora turned to look at him then, and whatever she saw in his face steady, unshaken, entirely unimpressed by a pretty woman with a basket of ribbon loosened something tight in her chest that she had been carrying since the torches in the pines. "You did not deny wanting to keep me around either," she observed. "No," Luke said. "I didn't." Zora said nothing more, but she rode the rest of the way sitting a little closer to him on the wagon bench than the road's rut strictly required, and neither of them moved away. The trouble with Garrick Voss did not stay quiet for long. 10 days after the trip to Hollow Creek, Luke was mending fence along the eastern edge of his property when he heard hoofbeats on the road, more than one horse, moving with purpose rather than the idle pace of travelers. Zora heard them too, from where she stood at the well drawing water, and by the time 4 riders came around the bend with Garrick Voss at their head, she had already set down the bucket and moved to stand at Luke's shoulder, hand axe loose and ready at her belt. "Yates," Garrick said, reining his horse up at the fence line, 3 men fanning out behind him, one already unslinging a rifle from his shoulder in a way that was meant to be seen. "Word is you've had that orc holed up here better than a fortnight. Magistrates had time to look into Cormac's death, and he's decided there's cause enough to bring her in properly this time. Rope, wagon, the whole affair. Trial's a formality when there's an orc standing over the body." "Funny," Luke said, "how you're the one so eager to see this trial happen fast, before anybody's had a real chance to ask who else had a reason to want Cormac in the ground." Something flickered across Garrick's face there and gone, but Zora caught it, and so did Luke. "You're accusing me of something, peddler. You'd best say it plain." "I'm saying a man doesn't usually ride 4 riders deep to fetch a woman for a formality," Luke said. "I'm saying you've been awful quick to want this settled and quiet ever since that first night in the woods. And I'm saying she's not going anywhere with you until there's a proper hearing with a proper magistrate in daylight, in town, where things can be looked at honestly. That's not your choice to make." "It's mine to stand in the way of, though," Luke said, and stepped forward to the fence rail, placing himself squarely between the riders and Zora, hands loose at his sides but his spine set like iron. "Same as I did last time." The rifleman raised his weapon halfway, and Zora moved before she had time to think about it, stepping up beside Luke rather than behind him, one hand closing hard over his shoulder to haul him half a pace back even as she planted herself in the space he'd occupied. "If you mean to shoot," she said, voice low and dangerous, tusks bared, "shoot me. I am the one you claim killed a man. He is only guilty of kindness, and I will not let you make him pay for that with his life while I stand here and watch." For a long, taut moment nobody moved. The rifle stayed half raised. The mare in the barn stamped and whickered at the tension in the air. Then Garrick, watching the standoff with narrowed eyes, lifted a hand and pushed the rifleman's barrel down himself. "Not here," he said. "Not without the magistrate's writ in hand. Wouldn't want anyone saying we did this without cause." His eyes cut to Luke, cold and promising. "But this isn't finished, Yates. You keep hiding a murderer, that makes you complicit. Folks in town are already saying it." "Let them say whatever they like," Luke said. "I'll take my chances with the truth." The riders wheeled and rode off back down the trade road, and Zora let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hand still gripping Luke's shoulder hard enough to bruise. "That was foolish," she said, rounding on him, fear curdling fast into anger the way it so often did. "You stood there with a rifle pointed at your chest for me. Do you understand what would have happened if he had not lowered it?" "I understand," Luke said, quiet, "that I wasn't going to let them take you while I still had breath to stop it. Why?" The question came out rawer than she meant it to, stripped of its usual challenge. "Why does my life matter so much to you, Luke Yates? You have known me a month. I'm not your kin, not your clan, not even your countrywoman. I am an orc accused of murder in a town that already hated me before I ever set foot in it." Luke reached up, slow and careful, and covered her hand where it still gripped his shoulder, his calloused fingers warm against her green-gray skin. "Because somewhere in this last month," he said, "you stopped being just an orc I was helping and started being the only person on this whole stretch of road I actually look forward to seeing at the end of the day. That's why." Zora stared at him, something in her chest cracking open that she had kept sealed shut since the night her own clan cast her out into the dark, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, standing there at the fence line with the dust of Garrick's riders still settling on the road behind them. "That is a dangerous thing to say to an orc," she said finally, very quietly. "Good thing I've never been much for caution," Luke said, and something in the way he smiled at her, tired and honest and entirely unafraid, made her want, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to let herself simply be wanted. They did not kiss that night. There was too much fear still riding hard on both their backs, too much unfinished danger hanging over the homestead. But that evening, as they sat together on the porch step watching the light fail over the mountains, Zora let her head rest against Luke's shoulder, and Luke let his hand find hers in the dark. And for the first time since the torches in the pines, Zora Steeljaw allowed herself to feel something other than watchful. "I need to know the truth about Cormac," she said into the quiet. "Not for the magistrate, for myself. I have spent my whole life being what my clan wanted or what humans feared. I want, for once, to be known for what I actually am." "Then we'll find it," Luke said. "I know every back road and trading post between here and the mountains. If Garrick Voss did something to Cormac over that land, there's a trail somewhere, and I know how to follow one." It took 11 days of careful, quiet work. Luke called in favors he had built over 6 years of honest trading. A stableman in Hollow Creek who remembered Garrick buying up quiet parcels of disputed land the season before. A trapper up in the high pass who had seen Garrick riding hard away from Cormac's stretch of creek, the very night the man died. A clerk at the land office 2 towns over who, for the price of a good trade knife and Luke's promise of future business, let them see the deed filings that showed Garrick had quietly petitioned to claim Cormac's water rights the week before the murder. A petition that would only succeed if Cormac died without an heir to contest it. Piece by piece, riding the back roads Luke knew better than any lawman in the territory, they built a case that pointed everywhere but at Zora. It was on the return leg of that journey, with the evidence folded carefully into an oilcloth pouch in Luke's saddlebag, that the mountain nearly killed them both and gave Zora Steeljaw the moment that would change everything between them. They had taken the high pass road to avoid Hollow Creek and any of Garrick's men who might be watching the main trade route, a narrow track that wound along a steep ravine before crossing a rope-and timber bridge spanning the White Fork River, swollen fat and violent with the last of the mountain snowmelt. They were halfway across the bridge, Luke leading the mare by her bridle, Zora just behind with a hand steady on the guide rope, when the sound of splintering wood cracked through the roar of the water below. "Luke!" Zora's shout was swallowed almost entirely by the river's thunder, but he felt the whole structure lurch beneath his boots and knew, without being told exactly what was happening. The bridge's upstream anchor post, weakened by weeks of flood, was tearing free of the bank, and the whole span was beginning to twist and fall away beneath them plank by plank. "Run!" Luke shouted, hauling on the mare's bridle, but the terrified animal reared instead of bolting forward, and the movement threw Luke hard against the guide rope, one boot punching straight through a rotted plank. For one heart-stopping instant, he hung half through the broken bridge deck with white water roaring 20 feet below, fingers scrabbling for purchase on wood that was already tearing away beneath him. Zora did not think. She threw herself forward across the collapsing span, planted one boot against the last solid timber, and closed both hands around Luke's forearm with a grip like iron, hauling him bodily up and out of the gap even as the whole section of bridge behind them groaned and tore free of its moorings, and crashed down into the churning river in an explosion of white spray and splintered wood. The mare. Luke gasped, scrambling for footing on the bucking remains of the span, but the horse had already made the desperate leap for the far bank on her own, half sliding, half falling onto solid ground, and there was no time to think of anything else because the section of bridge they stood on was tearing away from the near bank now too, the whole structure sagging and twisting toward the raging water. "Jump!" Zora roared, and there was no argument left in the world. No time for anything but trust. She seized Luke around the waist with one powerful arm, planted her feet against the last stable timber, and hurled them both toward the muddy slope of the far bank just as the remaining span gave way entirely and crashed down into the flood behind them. Gone in an instant, timber and rope swallowed by the White Fork's furious current. They hit the muddy bank hard, tangled together, sliding a full 6 feet down the slope before a stubborn root snagged Zora's boot and stopped them both from following the bridge into the river. For a long moment neither of them moved, chests heaving, rain-cold spray from the flood still misting over them, the mare whinnying nervously a few yards off where she had scrambled to safety. "You're insane," Luke managed finally, staring up at Zora where she had landed half over him, one arm still locked protectively around his ribs. "You could have been killed jumping in after me like that." "You would have been killed if I had not," Zora said, and her voice was rough with something that was not entirely anger. "Do you understand, Luke Yates, that I have watched men die on battlefields, watched warriors twice your size fall, and never made a sound of grief for any of them, and the thought of that river taking you nearly stopped my heart in my chest. I have fought in raids where I did not care whether I lived or died. I have never in my life been so afraid as I was in that single moment." "Zora, I am not finished," she said, and there was something fierce and open in her face now, stripped bare of all her careful guarding. "I did not choose to care for you. I did not ask for it. I have spent my whole life being told what to value: strength, blood, clan, war. And none of it, has ever mattered to me the way you have come to matter in the span of one single month. If that river had taken you, Luke Yates, it would have taken something from me that I do not think I could have gotten back." Luke reached up, muddy and soaked and shaking with the last of the adrenaline, and cupped her face in both hands, green-gray skin slick with rain beneath his palms. "Then don't let it," he said quietly. "Stay here, stay with me, not because you need somewhere to hide, but because I want you here. I've wanted that for weeks now, and I've been too much of a coward to say it plain." "You are many things, Luke Yates," Zora murmured, leaning into his touch, "but you have never once been a coward." And then she kissed him fierce and sudden and entirely without hesitation, the way she did everything, one hand fisting in the front of his soaked shirt to pull him up into it, and Luke met her with equal fervor, muddy and breathless and laughing against her mouth even as he kissed her back, because after weeks of careful distance and stolen glances, after a collapsed bridge and a river that had nearly taken everything, there was nothing careful left in either of them anymore. They rode the rest of the way home slower than they needed to, her hand never far from his on the reins, the oilcloth pouch of evidence tucked safe against Luke's chest. And when they finally reached the homestead in the blue hour before dawn, neither of them made any move toward separate beds. Zora came into the cabin behind him and did not go back to the barn loft that night, and what passed between them in the quiet dark of Luke's small house was slow and warm, and unhurried in a way that nothing else about their last month together had been. Her strength gentled into something tender, his steadiness met by a fierceness that left no doubt in him, not for one single moment, that he was wanted, that he was chosen, that this magnificent, fearless woman who could have had any warrior in any warband had looked at an ordinary peddler with dust on his boots and decided, entirely of her own will, that he was the one she wanted to keep. In the morning, with sunlight slanting warm through the cabin's single window, Zora took Luke's hand and pressed the flat of a small curved blade, no bigger than a finger, into his palm. "Among my people," she said, "when a warrior chooses a mate, she marks him so that any who see it know he belongs to someone who will not let him be harmed. It is not a thing done lightly. It is not a thing I have ever wanted to do for anyone before you. Zora, I don't know your customs. I don't want to do something wrong." "You will not do anything," she said, gentler than he had ever heard her. "I will, if you will allow it." Luke held very still as she drew the small blade in a careful, shallow line across the back of his left hand, just below the knuckles, no deeper than a scratch, stinging bright for only a moment before she pressed her mouth to it, sealing the small wound with a tenderness that made his chest ache. "There," she said. "Now any orc who sees that mark will know you are claimed, and any human fool enough to threaten you will answer to me. You are mine, Luke Yates, as surely as I am yours." "I was already yours," Luke said, voice rough, "long before that." They rode into Hollow Creek together 3 days later. On the morning the magistrate had finally agreed under considerable pressure from Luke's careful, patient campaign of favors called in, to hold a public hearing regarding the death of Abel Cormac. The town square was fuller than Zora had ever seen it. Farmers and shopkeepers and idle hands crowded shoulder to shoulder around a raised platform where the gray-bearded magistrate sat behind a plank table. Garrick Voss standing rigid and confident to one side with two of his riders flanking him, clearly expecting this to be a formality on the road to a hanging. The whispering started the moment Zora and Luke walked into the square together, her hand resting openly in his, no hood pulled up to hide her face this time. "Bold of her to show her face," someone muttered. "Bolder of him to keep company with her," came another voice, and Zora felt Luke's hand tighten around hers, steady and unashamed, refusing to let go even under the weight of 100 watching eyes. "Let's begin," the magistrate said, rapping his gavel against the plank table. "Zora Steeljaw, you stand accused of the murder of Abel Cormac. What do you say to the charge?" "I say I am innocent," Zora said, her voice carrying clear and steady across the square, "and I have brought proof of who is not." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Garrick's expression flickered just for an instant before smoothing back into practiced calm. "This is absurd," he said. "An orc claiming innocence with an orc's word is no proof at all." "It is not her word I've brought," Luke said, stepping forward and drawing the oilcloth pouch from inside his coat. "It's this." He laid the land office papers on the plank table before the magistrate, along with a signed statement from the stableman, and the trapper's account of Garrick riding hard from Cormac's land the night of the murder. Garrick Voss filed a petition to claim water rights on Abel Cormac's land, a petition that could only succeed if Cormac died without an heir to contest it, filed the week before Cormac was killed. A trapper saw Voss riding away from that stretch of creek, the very night of the murder, hard enough to nearly run his own horse into the ground. Ask him why, if he's got nothing to hide, he was in such an all-fired hurry that night to be anywhere but home. The square had gone very quiet. The magistrate picked up the deed filing, reading it slowly, brow furrowing deeper with every line. "This is a lie," Garrick said, but there was a thread of panic beneath the bluster now, and the crowd had begun to feel it too, the way a crowd always does when a confident man's confidence starts to crack. Peddlers deal in lies same as they deal in ribbon and salt. "Then explain the filing," the magistrate said, "with your own name on it, dated a week before Cormac died. Explain why you were seen riding hard from his land that same night. Explain why you were so eager to see an orc hanged quiet and quick, before anyone thought to ask a single question about who else stood to gain from Cormac's death." Garrick's eyes darted across the crowd, searching for support that was no longer there, faces that had once nodded along with his accusations now watching him with narrowed, suspicious eyes instead. "She's an orc," he said, voice rising, desperate now. "You take a peddler's word and some forged paper over the plain fact of what she is, over what her kind has always been to us." "I take the truth," the magistrate said, "over convenience, Voss, which is more than you seem willing to do." He turned to two of the town's constables standing near the platform. "Detain Garrick Voss for questioning regarding the murder of Abel Cormac. And somebody fetch Cormac's mule handler. If there's a witness to Voss's movements that night besides a trapper's account, I want it heard before this day is done." The crowd erupted into noise then, shock and argument and disbelief rolling through the square, and for a moment Zora braced herself for the old familiar tide of hatred to turn on her regardless of the evidence, for fear and prejudice to overpower reason the way it so often had before. But Luke's hand was still in hers, warm and steady and refusing to let go, and when she looked out at the crowd she saw, here and there, faces that had gone from suspicious to uncertain to something almost like shame. "I owe Cormac a debt from years back," an old farmer near the front called out suddenly, pushing forward through the crowd. "Man loaned me seed when my own crop failed, never asked a thing in return. He wasn't a man who'd have made an enemy of an orc peddler's woman found kneeling over him trying to help. That's not the Cormac I knew. And Garrick Voss has been sniffing round that creek land of his for a year now, loud as a dog in heat about it. Ought to have seen it sooner." More voices joined, murmuring agreement, and Zora felt something in her chest loosen that had been wound tight since the night the torches first came through the pines. Not triumph exactly, not yet, but something that felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like the beginning of belonging somewhere. It took the better part of that day for the full truth to come clear. Cormac's mule handler, once found and questioned, confirmed he had seen Garrick's horse tied near the boundary fence the evening of the murder, and under the mounting weight of evidence and the magistrate's steady, patient questioning, Garrick Voss's composure finally broke entirely, and he confessed, in a voice gone thin and bitter, to killing Abel Cormac in an argument over the creek land and fleeing the scene moments before Zora ever arrived. Never imagining an orc would wander by to be blamed so conveniently in his place. The magistrate ordered Garrick held for trial before the territorial court, and as the constables led him away in irons through a crowd that had gone from hostile suspicion of Zora to open, uneasy shame at how quickly they had been ready to hang an innocent woman, the magistrate rose from behind his plank table and addressed the square directly. "Let it be known," he said, voice carrying clear over the crowd, "that Zora Steeljaw stands cleared of all charges in the death of Abel Cormac, and that this town owes her an apology for how near it came to hanging an innocent woman on the strength of fear alone rather than truth. I'd ask every soul standing in this square to remember that the next time prejudice moves faster than reason." The square was quiet a moment, and then, slowly, awkwardly, one of the farmers near the front, the same old man who had spoken up for Cormac's character, stepped forward and extended a weathered hand toward Zora. "I owe you an apology of my own," he said. "Was ready to think the worst of you same as anybody else here, and that wasn't right of me. Thank you for not holding it against this whole town." Zora looked at that offered hand for a long moment, old instincts warring with something new and cautiously hopeful, before she finally reached out and clasped it. "Thank you for listening when it mattered," she said, "even if it took until the end to do it." Luke's arm slid around her waist then, unhesitating, entirely unashamed, right there in the middle of the crowded square with half of Hollow Creek watching, and this time nobody whispered a word of scandal about it. A few even smiled. "Come on," Luke said quietly, pressing a kiss to her temple that drew a startled, pleased murmur from a cluster of watching townswomen. "Let's go home." "Home," Zora repeated, testing the shape of the word, and found she liked it very much indeed. They did not leave Hollow Creek entirely behind after that day, though it took some months yet for the wariness between orc and town to soften into anything like genuine ease. Zora began coming with Luke on his trading rounds openly now. No hood, no hiding, and slowly, stall by stall, season by season, the merchants of Hollow Creek grew accustomed to the sight of the tall orc woman haggling sharp-tongued and fair over the price of grain, of the peddler's wagon rolling into the square with her seated proud beside him on the bench rather than hidden in the back. Mirabelle Hale, for her part, found herself a suitor from a neighboring town within the year and left off her flirtations with Luke entirely, though Zora never quite lost the satisfaction of the day Mirabelle had watched, tight-lipped, as Luke kissed Zora full and unashamed in the middle of the market square. By the time the first frost of autumn silvered the fields around the homestead, Luke had built a second room onto the little log house with his own hands, and Zora had planted a border of hardy mountain flowers along the garden fence that bloomed defiant purple against the coming winter cold, her own small, stubborn insistence that something beautiful could grow even in the harder soil of a life that had once seemed to offer her nothing but exile and suspicion. On a clear evening in early winter, with the first snow dusting the mountain peaks above the homestead, Luke found Zora standing at the fence line watching the sunset burn gold and red over the ridgeline, the same fence where Garrick's riders had once come to take her away. "Whatever you're thinking so hard about," Luke said, coming up beside her, "you've got that look on your face like you're about to say something that'll knock me flat." "Perhaps I am," Zora said, turning to face him, something soft and certain in her dark eyes. I have spent my whole life believing that worth was something earned through strength, through blood, through belonging to a clan that valued only what I could give in battle. My own people cast me out for wanting something gentler than war. I did not think after that I would ever again be wanted anywhere by anyone, simply for being myself. "Zora, let me finish," she said, and there was a fierce vulnerability in her voice now that she rarely allowed to show. "You stood between me and 6 armed men the first night we met, knowing nothing about me but that I was in danger. You believed me when the whole world had already decided I was guilty. You pulled me from a collapsing bridge and let me pull you from one in turn, and you have never once in all the months since made me feel like anything less than exactly enough exactly as I am. I have chosen many things in my life out of necessity. I choose you, Luke Yates, out of nothing but want. I want you. I need you. And I am done pretending that is a small thing." Luke's throat worked around something too large to speak past for a moment, and when he finally found his voice, it was rough with feeling. "I've spent my whole life being the fellow folks forget about until they need salt or thread carried in from the next town over," he said. "Nobody ever looked at me the way you do, Zora. Nobody ever chose me first above everyone else the way you have. I didn't know what that would feel like until you did it. I'm not about to let you go now that I know." "Good," Zora said, and pulled him into a kiss beneath the darkening sky, unhurried and certain, the kind of kiss that had nothing left to prove and nothing left to hide from. "Because I have no intention of releasing you, Luke Yates. Not now. Not ever." They stood together at that fence line as the last light faded from the mountains, the homestead behind them warm with lamplight, the town beyond it finally, hard won, at peace with the sight of an orc warrior, and a human peddler standing openly, unashamed, wrapped in each other's arms exactly where anyone passing on the trade road might see them. There was no more hiding left to do, no more torches in the dark, no more posses riding down on them with rope and rifle. There was only the quiet, solid certainty of 2 people who had found, against every hard edge of a world that had tried to keep them apart, exactly where and with whom they belonged. And when spring came again to the mountain homestead, and the flowers Zora had planted bloomed defiant purple along the garden fence once more, the people of Hollow Creek had long since stopped whispering when the peddler and his orc woman rode into the square together, and had started instead simply to wave, and to trade, and to let 2 people who loved each other fiercely and openly live their lives exactly as they had chosen together, unafraid and entirely, unshakably home.